Well, good afternoon. It's Dr. Kremens. It's about 3:30 on Thursday. So just wanted to do a quick video on the readings for Monday's class and on the quiz that we'll have on them. So we'll just do kind of briefly introduce you to them a little bit so you can kind of start thinking about them and going through them. I'll also try to give you some highlights from the article so that you can focus in on the different pieces of them. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind. The third paper I'm going to assign on Monday, so that's not due until the week after. So we'll take care of that on Monday night, and you'll see those directions for it before class on Monday. And then also the other thing on Monday night is we will have quiz number 2, and that will focus again on the Glennie, the Sinead O'Connor, and the Alyssa Harad articles. And I've listed those already on the announcement that I put up yesterday, but I'll just kind of go into a little bit more detail on them today. And the structure of the quiz will be, very similar to the first one that we did. You'll have 9 multiple choice questions. So I try to divide it up with 3 questions on each one of the authors and their pieces. And then the last question on this, and I'll talk about this a little bit more at the end of the video, is going to focus on the writing that you've already done for class. So I'm going to ask you a question where you sort of reflect on and talk a little bit about the paper number 1 and paper number 2. I just finished up the grades for paper number 2 and posted those along with the comments this afternoon. So you can take a look at those. So, we are, in the 4th week of the class, which is hard to believe, especially with the holiday on Monday coming up here. So I'm going to treat that almost, like essentially like a sort of midterm reflection. Like, here's the 2 papers we've done so far, and here's what your thoughts are on them. So I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the video here. So let me do a screen share and talk to you a little bit more about the reading. So for this week, let me switch over here. Give me a second. For the readings themselves, excuse me, my allergies have been a little bad today, which is why I'm inside, by the way, and not outside on the porch, which is what I usually like to do when I'm making these videos. So here we go. So for the readings for this week, and I'm coming out of Blackboard, and I've already opened them up, so I'll kind of walk you through this. These readings are here, as always, in the reading and writing section of the of Blackboard, and then the readings for paper number 3. Excuse me. So you'll see the folder here. Open that up. And then in here, you've got hearing essay. That's going to take you directly to that piece that's online on Evelyn Glennie's website. This is supplementary. I'm not going to, you can take a look at the TED Talk if you want to, because she just elaborates on more of her ideas, as she does also in the Sesame Street video, which is a lot of fun that she did probably about 15 years ago. So that's a nice little clip. But again, the main thing here is her hearing essay. And then from Sinead O'Connor, I mentioned in the update from yesterday, there's 2 of the essays in that selection that I'd like you to read. The one called The Piano and the one called The Greatest Love of All. And I'll show you those in a minute. There's actually a 3rd essay in there that we're not going to focus on. You can read it if you'd like, but we're only going to focus on those 2. And then Alyssa Harad's The Perfume Diet, which is also linked. It's actually on I think Oprah Winfrey's magazine's website. So again, they're all accessible. The O'Connor is a scan, and the other 2 are hyperlinks. So these 3 articles, as you're going to notice when you when you go through them, are really connected to the idea of how we use our senses. So in the case of Glennie, as you can already tell from the title of her article, she I maybe even mentioned her briefly on the first day of class. She's a classical jazz experimental, rock musician who is deaf. She started to lose her hearing when she was a kid, which she talks about a little bit in this article. And gradually, she and one of her teachers adapted. So as she was losing her hearing, she'd started as a piano player and wanted to continue making music. And she had a lot of support also from her mother and her father, who were themselves musicians. So when she was growing up in Scotland as a kid, she happened to also meet up with a really strong music teacher who started adapting with her to the changes in her hearing. So as her hearing or she was losing her hearing, or it was deteriorating, even as a little kid, she basically, aside from the fact that she already had the skill of being able to read music, which was something that her mother instilled in her as a kid, she was also then able to use her sense of touch in order to be able to play and perform with other people. So she then became a drummer and a percussionist. So when you see footage of her, like the Sesame Street piece, for example, she never wears shoes when she's performing, so that she can sense those low frequency vibrations. She's very, as any good musician should be, she's very cognizant of the people she's making music with. So if you watch other performances that she does, where she's in an ensemble, in a group setting. She's very careful about watching carefully what the other musicians are doing so that they can follow each other. So the way she creates her music is a crash course in how to be a really strong musician. Of using all your senses, particularly if you have one sense that maybe functions a little differently than the other ones. In this case, her hearing. But she's been able to adapt and not only become a world-renowned musician, but also a great teacher. And so in this article, as you read through it, basically what she tries to do is to briefly explain, what her experience has been with her loss of hearing and then continuing on as a professional musician. But she also tries to redefine what hearing actually is. And that's the part that I really want you to focus on, particularly when she gets into ideas like this, and I'm highlighting this part where she says deafness is poorly understood in general. For instance, there's a common misconception that deaf people live in a world of silence. And understand the nature of deafness, first one has to understand the nature of hearing. So it's also an article about how all of us hear and how all of us sense vibrations, sonic vibrations, that our ear then translates or sends to the brain for the translation into the idea of sound. And so this is a piece, again, which I hope you enjoyed, that's all about what is sound. How do we hear things? How do we sense things? And so she talks in detail about that. So as you're reading this, it's not a very long article. Look carefully at how she not only defines what she does as a musician, but also some of the frustration that gets raised when she's in interviews, because she'll have people asking her, about her sense of hearing. And as she says in this article, she says, "I'm not a hearing specialist." She's like, "I'm a musician." And so it's really her story is not only about overcoming some challenges that she had, particularly when she was younger, but also in developing almost like a different philosophy of what hearing actually is. So that's an essay that I hope you enjoy. And it ties in really well with the other two. I mean, these all kind of fit together as a unit, again, on the senses. I'll go to Alyssa Harad next, and then kind of end it and talking about these with the Sinead O'Connor. In this case, with the Alyssa Harad, this piece called The Perfume Diet is about, as you can tell by the title, her love of perfume, her fascination with scent and how our sense of smell works. And now in this particular case, she becomes obsessed with perfume, obsessed with colognes and collecting them and learning about where they come from. And she takes great inspiration also in her writing from these perfumes that are in her collection. And one thing that's especially interesting, I think, about her, this is something you'll notice as you're reading her, is that she's very different in terms of her writing style than the other writers that we've read so far. Everybody else, including Glennie, has a sort of very straightforward, streamlined, sometimes almost minimal style, like the Toni Morrison piece that we started the class with. This one is much more, maybe the old-fashioned term would be literary. It's more descriptive. There's more imagery in it. Her sense of humor is a lot of fun in parts of it. Pay particularly close attention to when she talks about the perfume that she collects as being like Halloween candy that she wants to have for herself. So this is really in the same way that Glennie sort of redefines what hearing is and how we sense the world through vibration. This is about our sense of a sense of smell, and how that sort of orients us in the world and gives us the opportunity not only to to make our way through the world, but to learn about different cultures also. I mean, she kind of talks a little bit about that in relation to her sense of smell. So this is a fun one. Again, it's not very long. Make sure when you're reading it, I've had this happen in the past with this essay, when you're scrolling through, make sure that you've read the whole thing here. So, it used to be set up on different pages, but they've actually streamlined this a little bit. So just make sure you read through the whole thing, even when you see these little stars in there, because that's the full essay, and just ignore the ads as we had happen in class. There's always some weird ads on these kind of sites, but this is a wonderful, wonderful essay that I hope you enjoy. And again, it's written in a very different kind of a style than what we've been looking at so far. And speaking of a different kind of style, that's where Sinead O'Connor comes in. Now, some of you might have heard of her, might be familiar with her from her musical career. I mean, she started in the mid 80s, was really successful in the early 90s with her second album, which had a big hit song on it. And she was not only popular in her home country of Ireland, but was not and popular here in the United States. But globally speaking, she was very, very successful, particularly with her second album and some of the songs on that. And I put up a sample of one of those, by the way, so you can kind of get a sense of her performance style. And so this one, I look at as almost summing up the other two articles. She's got a slightly more literary style than Glennie does, because she's again also a songwriter, and so has a very poetic style in her lyrics, very much influenced by literature, and also in some of her earlier work, very influenced by Irish folklore and traditional Irish music, and she kind of goes back in and out of those styles, and she has done over the course of her career. She's also been a really strong activist, in Ireland, particularly about issues regarding child abuse. She was abused herself as a kid, which she alludes to in some of these pieces. By her mother, and that's something that she's spent a lifetime trying to come to terms with, is that abuse, how it affected her, and her desire to make sure that doesn't happen to other people, to other children. And so that's been something in her that's been a through line in a lot of her work. She's a really interesting, powerful figure. And in these pieces, what she does is she tells us her sources of inspiration. I think this is similar to Harad, and the way Harad takes a lot of inspiration also from the perfumes and colognes that she collects. So when you're reading her, and I've just enlarged this a little bit here, you want to read the piano. That's the first time she really thought about becoming a musician, when she was a kid. So she talks about seeing her grandmother's piano as a child around the holiday season and being really obsessed with it. And she almost tells a ghost story in relation to that piano. So I hope you enjoy that short piece at the beginning here. As I said earlier in the video, you can skip over Lost in Music. It's good supplementary reading, but I'm not going to ask you anything on the quiz about that particular one. It just gives you a little bit more background about how she developed as a musician and as an artist. You can skip through that. That's an optional reading. I sometimes do that in my full length, English 101 classes when I've got a little bit more time. But I would like you to read this other piece at the end of the sequence, and you can see Sinead O'Connor here, with her very well-known buzz cut that she typically has, with the great and legendary Muhammad Ali, the great boxer here. So you see him here later in his life in the early 2000s, and this is when she got to spend time with him at Dublin Special Olympics. Same way we have the Special Olympics activities here, that they have them in Ireland as well. And it's a wonderful essay about how he was an inspiration for her. So she talks in the one essay about how her grandmother's piano was an inspiration, and how the sound just captivated her, which is another link back to Glennie, by the way sound is captivating. But this one is really about Muhammad Ali as a figure of real power in her life, someone that she never imagined as a kid growing up in Dublin in the 70s and 80s that she would ever meet, but she had the opportunity to meet him. And it's a wonderful essay about the inspiration that she took from him, and that other kids of her generation in Ireland also took from his example. So it's a great essay. Again, those are the two that I'd like you to read, and they kind of go into this idea of the sort of inspiration that these artists have taken in their work. So not only are we talking about the senses, about music, about the sense of smell, but each one of these writers and artists sort of talks about where they come from, like what was it that started them off on their careers and on their journeys as creative people. So I hope you, again, like I always say, I hope you enjoy these pieces, and find something interesting in them and their different writing styles. So let me do the stop the screen share here and come back and just kind of sum things up a little bit. So that's your focus for Monday. Just do those readings. Like I said, when you're looking at Evelyn Glennie, take a look at how she tries to redefine this, what hearing is, how it's defined. That's a really critical point in the first article. When you're looking at Harad, pay attention to her writing style. As I said, it's very different than some of the other work that we've looked at so far. And also take a look at what she says about scent itself, and how it sort of gives her that sense of creative freedom, sort of sparks her imagination. And then that ties in nicely with the Sinead O'Connor piece too, where she talks about the inspiration she took from, as I said, that piano that she saw as a kid, and also the inspiration that she took later in her life when she was able to spend some time with Muhammad Ali himself, and support him when he was visiting Dublin in the about 20 years ago. So these are pieces that on Monday we'll talk about in more detail in class together, and then a little bit later in class we'll do the quiz, which again will focus on those pieces. And then excuse me, as I mentioned, towards the end of the quiz, I'm going to ask you to write just a little self-assessment, and I'll give you a little prompt and a little description of it. I mean, really all you need to do to prep for that part of the what we're going to do on Monday, after the discussion of these pieces, and again after I introduce the directions for the third paper for the class, I want you to kind of go back, take a look at the first two papers. So that's the other thing I'd like you to do before Monday's class. Take a look at them. read back through my comments. If you haven't had a chance yet to go back to look through the comments, to kind of think about, some of the work that you've done so far, do that over the next few days. As I said, I posted the other grades and comments for paper number 2 today. So go back, look at my comments, look at the suggestions that I made. We're not doing a revision on these yet. As I said, later in the semester, as we get to the end of July, we'll have a little revision assignment, but I want you to already kind of look backwards at these first couple assignments that we've done before we get into the 3rd and 4th papers, in the next couple of weeks as we get into, the end of this month and into July. So just to kind of sum up, you want to read those pieces for Monday, go through them, take notes, email me if you have any questions, if there's anything in them that you're confused about or you want clarified, I'll be happy to answer. So send me an email about that. And then also, like I said, go back and reread your own writing. You're reading all these pieces by these other writers, but now you have this new body of writing of your own that you've been doing over the last month in our class. So go back and take a look at it. See the differences between those first 2 papers. How did you approach them? What were the challenges you faced as you were writing them? What kind of feedback did you get from me as I put those comments in, for these papers? So not only do I want you to read these 3 new pieces, but I want you to reread your own work as well, just to kind of get a sense of where you are now before we venture out into the 3rd paper that's going to focus on these writers. And by the way, with the 3rd paper, as happened with the 2nd one, you're going to have 3 options. As you can imagine, there'll be at least 1 option on. I usually give at least 1 on each one of these writers and their pieces. So that'll be something that we'll talk about a little bit more also on Monday. All right. So if you have any questions, as always, please send me an email. No cats in this video. They're sleeping right now. I think they're back. They've disappeared. They were here when I first started. And as soon as I started talking, they just disappeared and were bored, I guess, by what I was saying. So they're napping somewhere here this afternoon. So I hope you have a great rest of the day today and a nice weekend. And I look forward to seeing you on Monday. And like I said, email me with any other questions that you have. And of course, as always, tomorrow on Friday, I'll post the usual end of the week update, maybe with some additional Sinead O'Connor music so you can kind of get a better sense of her style. All right. So have a great rest of the day. Good evening. And I'll talk to you later. Bye.